Hello and welcome to the Methodical Methodist Podcast. Today's episode is a little different than what we normally do. Today I decided to invite some of my friends to talk about our love for the series of The Lord of the Rings. And so I hope that you enjoy this time and this conversation that we were able to have together. Hello and welcome to the Methodical Methodist Podcast, a podcast where we talk about why the church is still relevant for us today as we explore themes connected to religion, politics, pop culture, faith, and yes, even the church. Together we can find out what it means to live into the mission of the church by making disciples. Now, let's get methodical. Hello everyone, I am your host, the Reverend Andrew Lay, and I am excited to spend this time on the podcast today. If you like the show, hope that you might take a minute to subscribe, rate, and write a review for the podcast. It helps to boost the show and make it to where more people can find it. You can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/methodicalpod, and you can find me on Instagram as well. My handle is @methodicalpod, so be sure to check me out. Well, I'm glad to have my good friends Matthew Huff and Scott McPherson on the podcast today as we talk about this series that we love so much by J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. Thank you guys so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, happy to be here.
It is my honor, Andrew Lay.
I think every time we get together, at some point in the conversation, it makes its way to the Lord of the Rings. We seem to always kind of talk about our love of this book series and this movie series. That being said, none of us are authoritative scholars on the subject by any means.
Nope.
But I thought it might be fun to just record us talking about this series and why we love it so much. So let's just jump right in. What do you love most about this series? And what is it about this story that really draws you into it?
You can go first, Scott. Yeah, you go first, Scott.
Well, thank you. I first was introduced to the series through the books. That's where I fell in love with The Hobbit at a very young age. But, there's just so much adventure and, heroic actions and great characters. A great timeless story of good versus evil. I love the fact that the most unsuspecting creature in the entire story is kind of the one who dictates and ends up saving the day. It's just a really, really cool, and Tolkien just made such a fascinating world and complete world, which I think is really, really amazing.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd add to that. For me, it's I think it's just the world building aspect that Tolkien was able to do. He created, a deity structure. He created language. He created races. He created, actually several different, dialects of the. Because Tolkien was like a literary scholar, and he was he was really good at languages. I think he actually has like the best Old English to English interpretation of Beowulf. So Tolkien was just a brilliant dude, and just whatever he was able to create, and his son Christopher Tolkien was able to take to the next level. It's just you can get lost in it.
He was like one of the most I don't know the word, but the most knowledgeable people on Beowulf, which I find very interesting. So despite also not, even not making Lord of the Rings, that's part of his legacy, is just being this incredible scholar and this old poem, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I heard that he was like a linguist actually, and so language was a really big thing that he dealt with. And I don't know if this is true, but I heard a rumor that he not only created the Elvish language, but he created an old Elvish language. He created different versions of a language and kind of a history of these languages, which is, I think, just amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool because you can learn to speak Elvish. You can write. There's an alphabet. It's not just like some fantasy worlds, but where you might have certain phrases, but you can learn to speak Elvish, which is it's wild that he put that much effort into it.
Yeah, I think the language is called Quenya. I think that's how you say it. But
Yeah, I mean he's a master storyteller and does such a great job of, like y'all said, creating a world, creating an environment, creating a whole thing that people can get lost in. And I think we've all experienced ways in which we've gone down some rabbit holes and spent a lot of time studying certain aspects of his world that he created because it's so fascinating and goes so deep.
yeah,
Um,
definitely. And a lot of people, they kind of, like a lay person, as you will, no pun intended, Andrew. But a lay person in Lord of the Rings, because there's always all these people, and they're like, oh, I love Lord of the Rings. I'm like, oh, have you read the books? And they're like, no, but I love the movies. I'm like, listen, that's level one. Okay, you have to take your expansion into the world of Lord of the Rings, like you know the period of time that the Hobbit and the end of Lord of the Rings, that's like maybe like, I don't know exactly, but maybe like 70 years. I mean, there's tens and thousands of years of history in the world that you can get lost in.
yeah, pretty remarkable. J.R.R. Tolkien have a great quote from him. He said, "I am, in fact, a hobbit in all but size. I like gardens, trees, and farmlands. I smoke a pipe and like good plain food. I like and even dare to wear these dull days ornamental waistcoats. I am fond of mushrooms out of a field. I have a very simple sense of humor, which even my appreciative critics find tiresome. I go to bed late and get up late when possible. I do not travel much." And that's kind of where he is the quote, but he says, I consider myself a hobbit. I am a hobbit, in fact. Um, so what I thought we might do is if we could talk about the different characters and the different species, the races that we find in the land and the story of the Lord of the Rings, and out of those species and races and characters, which one do you most identify with and why?
Okay. Well, and, I guess if we're going to do this, it would be good to kind of just start at the top, and that would be R.R. Luvatar, which is the deity in Lord of the Rings. He sang a song and he like gave life into all creation, and then his creation were the Valar, and those are like separated into the Maiar and the no wait sorry the Valar is part of the Einar. There's a lot of confusing terminology here. But you got the Einar, then there's the Maiar and the Valar, and so like they're kind of like the deity structure. And then from there, some of the Valar created their own race, but there was two races created by Iluvatar himself, and those are the elves and the humans. So those are kind of the two most important races. But several Valar created. Um, let's see, they created the Ents, the dwarves, the orcs, and or you can call them goblins if you will. Let's see, am I missing any? Eagles, they count. They're a sentient species in Lord of the Rings. But and then of course not everyone's favorite, but most people's favorite is the Hobbit. And hobbits is kind of shrouded in mystery where they came from, but they're basically an offshoot of man. And I can't speak for Scott, but I can speak for Scott. Me and him probably both identify as hobbits the most, and they're kind of as much as these other powerful races and are out there. It ends up being the lowliest of heroes, the Hobbit, that kind of saves the day, and that's kind of what draws people to this story. Even the little guy, the Hobbit, the person that lives in a tiny, basically essentially a glorified rabbit hole, can save the world. So that's what I like. That's kind of run down the different races.
I would definitely agree with Matt. My like perfect day would be smoking a pipe under a large tree and out in the woods, and that's very hobbit-like. I am probably stubborn as a dwarf, if I'm being honest, but I mean the hobbit lifestyle is it's very simple and laid back, which I think we all kind of share in that laid back lifestyle. We like to kind of take things at our own pace and everything, and I love that in the movies, not so much in the books, but in the movies, all these characters go off on these grand adventures, they fight goblins and orcs and monsters, and they fight literally the entity of evil. And in the movie, they get back, and the Shire, where the hobbits live, are just totally unbothered by everything that's going on. Which I think that's kind of funny. There's definitely a part to play in being involved in things, but it's just funny that all these things happen, and here your hobbits are just farming and smoking pipes and brewing beer and taking pleasure in good food, and there's something to say about that kind of simple life, and maybe slowing down and just appreciating things that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always kind of been drawn to the hobbits as well, because they have such a joyous and simple outlook on life. They find joy in very simple things, and that's why they're oftentimes unconcerned and just unaware of what's going on in the greater land, because they're content where they are. Like, they're content doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I believe I think it's I forgot who says it, but good tilled earth and some nice pipe weed and a hearty ale, and that the hobbit's pretty happy. And I think that's pretty nice.
One of the things that I really appreciate about Tolkien in this series, and we've kind of talked a little bit about it, about the world he created, but he created some specific places: the Middle Earth, the Shire, the Misty Mountains, Rivendell, and he even wrote about the creation of that world in another book entitled The Silmarillion. And so, as we think about that, what are some of the things about this world that stick out to you? And what do you find interesting about the world that Tolkien was able to create?
I mean, just the fact that he's made a world that feels real and feels lived in. I mean, you could, minus the dragons and the kind of more fantastic parts of this story, you could imagine that it was a real culture and a real place and time. I love that he takes a lot of time. I mean, he does spend a lot of time in the books describing the various trees and mountains of certain places. And it definitely feels like he's basing it on somewhere that he's been, or somewhere that he's in real life. And I think that's what helps bring out the realism and the kind of the real world that we get to experience through his eyes.
Yeah, totally. I think another big part is, the world's just so big, and all we kind of see for the most part is, Middle Earth, and even that just a huge, huge landscape. And the fact that they don't really have a lot of technology, hardly any, and they have to walk or travel by horseback, and it just makes the world seem that much bigger. There's a lot of times when you're in a car, you're just driving through a place, but when you got to stop and rest your horse, when you got to stop and eat in a tavern, and stop and make a camp, even if you're on top of Weathertop, and the ring racer right behind you, just kind of it's just such a big, expansive world, and it's just a beautiful place. I wish I lived there.
Yeah, it looks a lot like New Zealand, I think.
Yeah, for some reason I think that's true.
So kind of a follow-up question. What do you find characteristic of each little community in the different areas of Middle Earth? So, for example, you have the hobbits who live in the Shire. How is each specific in terms of the culture and the residents? So, in other words, can you kind of explain where each of the residents live and what that kind of looks like, and what makes that area different than the others?
Okay. Yeah, use the example of, the Shire and the hobbits, and, the hobbits are kind of, they're kind of away from the world. Their closest city is Bree, so they're kind of away from, from Rohan and Gondor. So they kind of get by with being separated from the world a little bit. So it kind of makes them peaceful. And I think they had like one battle back in the day. It was like Pippin's grandfather, he's like a legend, but kind of makes them quaint, and they don't really care much for the world. Then you got the vast expanses of Rohan, and they're kind of like like a roaming community of, horse riders, and like, kind of makes them like resilient, but also like, dependent on horses. And then, Gondor's, like where the big city is, and, there's a little bit of land around there, but, they're kind of like, more industrious, and, it's kind of where the seat of power is in Middle Earth. And of course, you got the different, sects of dwarves, and, they live under the mountains, and they kind of really don't care for the world that much either, because it's hard to get in those mountains, and they really have a mind for gold and jewels. So they don't really concern themselves with the world. And then, in the forests, you have the elves, and they're reclusive as well. And, everybody just kind of sticks to themselves until they're forced to be together or fight together.
Yeah, I think that's what makes the Lord of the Rings a neat story too, is because you have almost a representative of each of these areas come
Mhm.
together to go to Mordor, this kind of area where there's the goblins and the orcs, and kind of where evil is inhabited.
I enjoy
Sure.
that also, the kind of the land that these characters live in, it also has an effect on their culture's personalities, right? The Shire is more roaming farmlands, soft woods, which the Shire folk tend to be farmers, and they like to till in the earth and stuff like that. Dwarves live they live in stone, something that's hard to dig through, to build through, to live in, and that's where their kind of toughness and their stubbornness, but also their hard craftsmanship. They're really good at building weapons, and they make these elaborate cathedrals underground, and that kind of reflects on their culture. And then you look at Rohan, vast roaming lands where suitable for horses, and it's just interesting how in the real world that's people's cultures and um, types of ways of living were very affected by the way they lived in, like the area they lived in. So it's just kind of a unique way Tolkien put a real world touch on his stories, like he always does.
For sure.
As we think about how our environment kind of shapes who we are and the culture that we have, it's interesting to think about one character who is shaped over time, and that's the character of Gollum, who I think is
Yeah.
one of the more complex characters that we see. We find out that he was once a store hobbit, Stoor.
Hmm.
That's how you say that. He was of the river folk, and originally named Smeagol. And over time, he is corrupted, and he becomes obsessed with this ring that really becomes central to the story. And we also see that that orcs were originally elves that had been corrupted
Hmm.
as well. So what do you think the story of Gollum tells us about humanity, and what lessons might we learn from looking at his story and this idea of corruption?
I think Gollum is just I mean, he's a great character, despite the fact that some would say he's evil, but I would say he's motivated by something that's uncontrollable. But to me, it's that lust for something that you can never attain, or something that's never going to give to you the thing that you need from it. And it totally poisons Gollum. I mean, he's a very small creature with he's pale, and he lives in underground, and it's just the type of power the ring has held over him. And to me, that applies to real life. People are always chasing something that may not give them the full satisfaction of attaining it, whether it's money or a marriage or whatever it might be. Some things people sometimes focus so hard on chasing this object that kind of forget about everything else, and they don't really live. And I think that's an interesting example of how to connect the two from Tolkien to the real world.
Yeah, for sure. And Gollum's just such a interesting character, because like right off the bat, it's Smeagol, like he kills his, I don't know if they were cousins or something like that, but he killed Deagle, who's like his cousin. It's just amazing the effects that the ring had on Smeagol so early on. You see like Bilbo and Frodo. It's kind of a gradual thing that the ring corrupted them, but for Smeagol it was really quick, and it obviously made him this grotesque creature, but sort of, during the Lord of the Rings trilogy, you kind of see like a redemption arc for Smeagol. Like, he kind of is winning over him, his other self for a little bit, and gets Gollum kind of out of the way. But, the ring just keeps coming back and back. And that's just kind of like, society, it's, I don't mean to get all philosophizing on you guys or anything like that. But, it's, certain things that, we think we break the habit, and, here we go, we get a chance of it and we go straight back to it. And that's, it's unfortunate to see Smeagol, but, without Smeagol, the ring wouldn't have been as safe as it was for so long. And without Smeagol, Frodo probably would have popped that ring on and kept it. So, he definitely served his purpose, and he got to die with it, which is probably what he wanted anyway. So.
Scott, you said something that kind of made me think. You said some people would say that Gollum is evil, but you weren't sure. And so I wondered, what do y'all think of that? What is it about Gollum that's making him who he is? Like, what is it that is causing him to be corrupt in that way? And is it really him being evil? Like, what's really driving him here?
I think it's just the ring itself. The ring is, the soul of Sauron is, in the ring, and that ring is doing whatever it can to get back to its master, and it's using the host. He's basically like, it's hard to say that Smeagol's evil, because it seems to me that he's just kind of, it's acceptable to the ring more than others, and he's just doing the will of the ring. For the most part. Of course, he's able to fight it and hold on to it for himself a little bit, but he's definitely fighting this corruption his whole arc. And I don't know, Scott, you can feel free to add to that.
Well, I think it just twists the person's kind of deepest insecurities or desires. If you look at the character Boromir, played by the excellent Sean Bean in the movies, Boromir is one of my favorite characters, but in a lot of people's minds, he's kind of seen as a bad guy or a villain, especially in the first movie, because he's he wants the ring, but then you kind of realize that he wants to only protect his people and live up to his father's very lofty expectations of him, and that ring just twists and corrupts that Boromir wants to do for good and protect his people and be strong and everything, and it just finds those little weaknesses and twists them just enough to where that Boromir wants the ring for himself, and he might have killed Frodo for it, which I think is just a very interesting, and that's how it affects everybody. Bilbo, Gollum, even when you see Faramir, who is Boromir's brother, he wants to take the ring for his own. He wants to use it as a weapon against the darkness, but that's just not the way it's designed, and it's going to corrupt whomever has it, which is why the hobbits are so interesting, because they don't seem to be as, holden to its power as every other creature does, which is really interesting. And that's why, the hobbits being the kind of the main part of the story is so interesting, because the ring doesn't seem to have as much of a hold over the hobbits as everybody else.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That really makes me think of two specific scenes that are played out, I think, really well in the movie. The first one is when Gandalf sees a ring. He quickly gives it to Frodo, and then you see Frodo try to offer it back to Gandalf, and Gandalf is very quick to say, no. Like, I can't, don't tempt me with that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And he realizes that even though he might have the best intentions with that ring initially, over time he would be corrupted by it.
Yeah, definitely. And and that kind of happened with the Lady Galadriel as well. People like Galadriel and people like Gandalf, and sort of to a lesser extent, Saruman, like, they think they can use like the ring's trying to tell you, hey, you can use this ring, you can be powerful, but like the ring is just a liar, and like the ring is like the only person it really works for is Sauron, and kind of extended universe here, like going into the weeds, it's Celebrimbor too, just a little bit, because Celebrimbor and Sauron crafted the ring like thousands of years ago. But anyway, that's few and far between.
Yeah, I mean that I think that scene with Galadriel, which was the second one that came to my mind, was an interesting one, Matt, and you mentioned it too, because like she kind of overcomes the initial power, right?
Yeah,
she gives herself kind of a pat on the back, but I watched that scene in the movie because I watched the movies before I read the books, but I watched that scene and just was like, poor Frodo had to go through that scary moment with her.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
just to prove that she could,
Yeah, when I was a kid, that scared the crap out of me. Like that was like when I first saw it, that was terrifying.
Oh yeah, and you see a little scene moment too with Bilbo where he, and that kind of scared me too. I don't know if you guys remember where he kind of reaches for the ring from Frodo and kind of has that same look.
Yeah, he's like sharp teeth and stuff. Very scary.
You get that glimpse of how that ring can so quickly corrupt you.
Oh yeah.
And so as we think about Gollum and corruption and evil, one thing that I think is one character that I think is really the essence of evil is Sauron in the land of Mordor.
Yes.
So what do you think about this character? What do you make of this character? How do we see evil lived out through this character?
I mean, Sauron is almost literally the epitome of evil. He is cruel and has a lot of malice, and his really only goal is to cover Middle Earth in darkness and rule as its dark supreme overlord. So there's not a lot of redeeming qualities for your boy Sauron, but you see that. You see that in just the physicality of the landscape he lives in. It's bleak. It's very smoky. Looks rotted. There's not a lot of trees or greenery. I mean, his essence is literally housed in a volcano, which is typically a destructive force. That thing, nothing really good comes from a volcano. But and that's his goal. So just the fact that the land he rules over is so disgusting and gross. That just shows how evil he is, and how much his evil seeps into his kingdom.
Yeah, definitely. And Sauron. I mean, the guy has like the only lines he has in the whole series are for the most part it's like whispering and like just short phrases. So you really can't see. I mean, like you really can't gain his evil from what he says, but you could tell by what he's trying to do and the land he rules over. Like that's how he's trying to make the entire world. And I mean, he's an evil guy. I mean, he's not even the most evil guy in the whole, Lord of the Rings universe. He was the chief lieutenant of Melkor, or Morgoth, as some like to call him. But that's again going into the weeds. But they both have the same vision, is to basically cause discord and cause imbalance to the world that Iluvatar created, and that's their only goal.
As we think about evil, I think one of the major themes we see in this series really is a struggle between good and evil. And I have a quote from Aragorn in the second book, The Two Towers, where he says, "Good and ill have not changed since yesteryear, nor are they one thing among elves and dwarves and another among men." So what are some of the examples that showcase this struggle between good and evil in the story of the Lord of the Rings? Where do we see this kind of lived out?
Scott mentioned Boromir earlier. You kind of see, like pretty much every time you see someone like contemplating like taking the ring from Frodo, that's kind of like a power, like, can your good overpower your evil in that moment? Like, is temptation, is desire, like, can it trump your goodness? And, a lot of times, people fall. And, and another example, we see Saruman. Saruman was, he's a Maiar, and he came to the world to try to help. And even someone as good as him and as pure as him, like basically like a demigod, is corruptible to evil. And we see it play out several times. Like, elves were twisted and made into orcs, and even in the Hobbit, we see Thorin, succumbing to greed as well. There's definitely a lot of. It seems like a lot of Tolkien's main sins are greed and power. That's kind of like the root of evil to Tolkien a little bit.
I would say, yeah, greed, power, and then like the destruction of the natural world. Tolkien really was concerned with that. There's a lot of, he was alive during the industrial, like really the big smog in England and the war machine and everything, and that really does seep into his books. As Sauron tears down his forest in order to fuel his war machine, and that upsets the tree shepherds or the Ents. And that the fact that the natural world is very important to Tolkien is very obvious in his books and the films as well.
Definitely.
As we're thinking about good and evil and that struggle, one of the characters in the book, which unfortunately did not make it in the Peter Jackson movies, I think embodies good at its core, and that's the character of Tom Bombadil.
Definitely.
What do y'all make of this character, especially knowing that the ring has no effect on him?
You can read conspiracy theories all day on Tom Bombadil. Some people argue that he was supposed to be a character from another Tolkien book, and he kind of just threw him in there, but for those that don't know, Tom Bombadil is a guy that lives pretty close to Farmer Maggot's farm, and he's basically just this old guy that's married to a water nymph, which is like physically pretty much the embodiment of nature. And there's one point in time where Tom has the ring, and he's like and just kind of throws it away. So he's not really attached for the world. And some people argue that he's the Iluvatar, in human form, just kind of chilling and being weird. He's a weird character, and I kind of understand why Peter Jackson didn't put him in the movies, just because it would confuse people to beyond belief.
But it's a very odd thing to just throw in the beginning of a book and never return to ever again.
Yeah, he doesn't make any other appearances. It's pretty bizarre, and he's just such a weird character. And if Peter Jackson basically did a page for page Lord of the Rings book, they'd be 15-hour long movies. And I would love it. But Tolkien will spend 3 pages explaining trees.
Yeah.
And not even the ones that can walk around. Just his level of detail and what he put in the books is incredible. And Tom Bombadil just seems like a really odd bird to me, for Tolkien style, because he doesn't make any sense.
I got 2 thoughts on Tom Bombadil. One, if you're a person who's never read the books, I encourage you to do so. But just know that the books will pick up after Tom Bombadil leaves. If you're reading the books, you're like, why is this in the book and what's happening? Just power through it. And then the books really they follow the movies for the most part pretty accurately. Second thing, there's an excellent bluegrass song by Nickel Creek called In the House of Tom Bombadil. It is excellent. Please give it a listen for all those people listening.
That's awesome.
That's interesting that you mentioned music when you talk about him, because that's pretty much all he does. He only sings when he talks. That's all he does, really, it seems, in the book. He's singing verses. He's singing songs the whole time he's interacting. So, yeah, super strange character. Don't really know where he comes from. Don't really even know why he is in there. But I've also heard some folks say, well, if there's no effect on this ring, why not just give it to him? Why not, or let him destroy it, or let him just hold on to it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in the Council of Elrond, Gandalf kind of dismissed that. He's like, listen, the ring doesn't have any power over Tom, but also he doesn't have any power over the ring. It's not like he can just crush it, and like Elrond even, I think he says he's a strange creature or something like that. Like even the people in the world don't know what to make of him. Like they know he's super old, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all they know about him. He's an odd character. He's a really quirky character, and I mean, if you're going to put him in there, I wish they kind of would have expanded upon him at some point, or, But now that Christopher Tolkien's dead, I mean, I don't think anybody's got the authority to even say anything about him anymore.
No, I say just leave it kind of as is and let it
Yeah.
be a strange little detour from the story,
Mm-hmm.
and then just move on.
Yeah, he's definitely mysterious. You don't get any closure on that part of the story at all.
Yeah.
Um, but I think super fascinating character.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with him, but it's just how do you quantify any of it?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that we can hopefully quantify and talk about it maybe with a little bit more knowledge is the friendship that we see between Frodo and Samwise Gamgee, which is really central to the story. They're traveling together to destroy the ring along with two other hobbits, although these are the two that really remain together throughout the story. Um, and we actually see some ups and downs in their friendship, partly because of Gollum. But what qualities do you see in this friendship, particularly when it comes to Sam? And what skills and attributes does he have? And then where do you see maybe some shortcomings?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sam's definitely one. I mean, in my opinion, Sam's like the hero of the story almost. I mean, sure, Frodo's the ring bearer and all that stuff, but Sam is like basically drives him to Mordor. Sam's loyal, and early on, it's kind of more of like I mean, I'm sure they were friends, but like I think like Sam might have been his gardener. So there's like an employer-employee relationship kind of started out. And there's always sort of like a respect for Mr. Frodo because the Bagginses and in the Shire, like they're kind of like a richer family, so they have people working for them. But Sam's just a good guy, and he's loyal to a fault. And if it wasn't for basically Frodo like forcing him to not be a part of the group anymore, and then even that, like Sam realizes that Gollum has been deceiving him the whole time and goes back to try to save Frodo.
I love the friendship between it's more of a bromance if you're being honest. There's a lot of people who but yeah, it's a great friendship. And even one of my favorite parts of the book is when Sam and Frodo are in Mordor finally after pages and pages and pages of trial and tribulation, and they're pretty defeated and they're hiding in this little and Sam looks up and sees a single star shining through the smog and the filth and the smoke, and he says that I'm paraphrasing obviously, but even the smallest amount of light can shine through the darkest and grimiest smoke, fog, darkness, whatever there is. And that's a really great moment for Sam because it's at this point they're about to give up, but Sam still has this hope and this optimism to keep going, keep pushing. And I think that's one of Sam's great qualities. I do feel like that he's he can be pretty insecure. I don't think he really believes in himself all the time,
For sure.
and that definitely plays into the fault of why Gollum can convince Sam to leave, and or convince Frodo to turn Sam away, because sometimes Sam doesn't. You see that when he wants to flirt with the Hobbit, his Hobbit crush into the Shire. He just doesn't feel like he's worthy. And he mentions that when they're walking and he's talking about how they're going to tell stories of Frodo the Great, and and I want to hear the story about Frodo, and Frodo really has to remind him, no, Sam, you're part of the story too, and like you're an integral part of the story, and I think that's really awesome. Sam is the GOAT, Matt. I agree with you. He's, without Sam, Frodo doesn't make it. I don't think.
No, not at all.
For
But
sure.
to me, that also just tells me the importance of friendship and loyalty and having your friends back. Would Sam have made it by himself? No, I don't think so either. I think you got to have someone to kind of carry you and look out for you at all times.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of where Sam lacked in confidence and the ability to kind of press on. Frodo made up for that, and Sam, as far as like compassion and stuff, he helped Frodo do that. So they kind of picked each other up. Like any great friendship, like you pick up your friend, in their weaknesses, and you do the same for them.
Yeah, I think another really important character to the story, one who I think really sets the whole journey in motion for them, is the character of Gandalf.
Yeah.
And he is a wizard, one of the 5 Astari that are mentioned in the universe of Lord of the Rings. And so I didn't know if y'all wanted to mention those 5 wizards and maybe talk about them and what we know about them.
Okay.
And maybe what insights you have about these characters as well.
Okay. Yeah. So the East 3, so there's 5 wizards, and they're basically Maiar that came from, like they were kind of sung into existence by Iluvatar. But these Maiar, these lesser forms of basically gods, they can inhabit human form, and they were sent from the Undying Lands, or not the Undying Lands, but like the Halls of Valinor, like which is where all the gods live. They were sent there to Middle Earth to kind of help out, and there was 5 of them, and they have different names than what they're called when they get there. Like Gandalf's real name isn't Gandalf; it's something else I forgot. But so anyway, so there's 2 blue wizards, and these blue wizards go off into the east, and they're kind of never seen again. Like no one really knows what happened to them. Some people speculate that they started like magical cults, like out in the east, and like it kind of no one really knows. Like Gandalf hadn't seen him in so long he forgot their names. And then there's Radagast the Brown, and he doesn't really care about the world much either. He's really he really cares more for the forest, and of course Saruman says he eats too many mushrooms. I love mushrooms personally on hamburgers or kebabs or anything.
If we're being honest, they're probably like magical mushrooms, and Radagast ain't seen too many things straight these days.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, it's funny because that scene in the Hobbit where Radagast brings back that little porcupine. Yeah, he's not supposed to do that. That's like breaking one of the rules the Valar gave him, is like to bring people back from the dead. He wasn't supposed to do that, but he did it. So he's kind of more of a rule breaker. He's a little lawless. Like he doesn't really care about his mission to like help the humans and the elves like defeat evil. But and Saruman, he helped for a little while, but he eventually was corrupted. And then here's our boy Gandalf, Gandalf the Grey, and he kind of was instrumental in getting the dwarves back to Erebor. And he's helped for as long as he's been there, and he's a real affection for hobbits, and people never understood why, but he's got his reasons. But okay, Scott.
I like Gandalf because he is central to the story in both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, but he's not the main character, right? He kind of nudges Bilbo to go on this adventure, and he does show up. He shows up quite often
to save the day.
To save the day, which is great.
Yeah.
And then the Lord of the Rings, like his job is not to take the ring to Mordor; it's to escort Frodo to Mordor. But then they break off, and he's like, "Okay, the new goal is to combat Sauron a different way." So I love Gandalf. I kind of loved him from The Hobbit. He's a little more silly in The Hobbit. He's not quite as serious, but just that the mentorship, and he always seems to have the right answer for everything, and he's really great. He's the best.
Yeah, I think he kind of like knows his role too. Like he knows what his mission is, and he's able to equip other people to live out their mission as well. And I think that's one of the reasons why Gandalf is probably my favorite character. And Scott, he may be yours too, judging because you have a tattoo of him on your chest. But I think we see Gandalf, really expressing some real power and wisdom throughout the story. But at the same time, like you said, Scott, he's not necessarily like the main character, but he plays such a vital role in the story. Okay, so I've got one last question for you guys, unless y'all have anything else y'all want to add.
I was just gonna say we should discuss the movies for a bit.
Okay.
Because the movies did a great job of bringing Lord of the Rings to the mainstream, and I to this day think they're one of the best cinematic experiences of all time. It's just great the way Peter Jackson really poured himself into those films, and all the actors seem to really fit the roles perfectly. So
Yeah.
They're great. I actually a few weeks ago during the beginning of COVID, me and some friends from work, we did a marathon. Started like 8 a.m, made breakfast, watched all three of them throughout the day.
Wow.
It was a lot to take in, but man, they're just amazing. They're just amazing things.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like, if you're going to watch them, definitely try to watch the extended editions, try to get as much as you can. I mean, they were beautifully done. Like honestly, it's like the perfect trilogy. Like
I agree.
all three movies are perfectly paced. They put enough information in there for the story to be fulfilling, yet, it don't get you down in the weeds, like the books tend to do. But yeah, it's just a beautiful series, and hopefully they never remake them. They have a tendency to remake stuff. Like, what was wrong with the first Lion King? Geez Louise. But, I hope 20, 30 years down the line, people aren't just like, hey, we should make Lord of the Rings, but with cooler CGI. It's like, don't fix it if it's not broke. And
no,
those movies are perfect.
Those movies look, just from a film standpoint, taking away the great story and the characters and everything, just a marvel to make and create. The amount of detail put into the models and the armor and the giant sets and the locations and everything. You don't see that often these days, and so I really appreciate them, especially doing that back in 2019, late 90s to early 2000s, when that was such a feat back then. And the music is stunning. I was just telling you, we were talking about this the other day, and how the Rohan theme, it makes my hair on the back of my neck stand up every time I hear it.
It'll bring a tear to your eye.
Or the Shire theme, when you hear that, you just kind of feel like you're at home. I love it, man. It's great. But yeah, I just wanted to say that the movies they're a great entry. If you don't know anything about Lord of the Rings, they're a great kind of gateway into that. They're perfectly cast. The acting is great. The action's great. Everything's really just they're perfect films, for being honest.
That actually leads me perfectly into my last question, which is, what is your favorite scene or moment in movies?
Oh man, that's tough.
It's tough. I know.
Gosh, just give me a second, Scott. If you got it in mind.
I was gonna say if I could maybe have like a top 3.
Okay.
Because I love them so much. I would definitely say the Bilbo's birthday party. I know it's like the very beginning of the film, but it sets the tone of the movie just so perfectly, because there's the fireworks and again, everyone's kind of having a great time. And I love that scene when he shoots the fireworks, and it's great. I also, when Gimli blows the horn in the Two Towers, and the kind of whole, they're in Helm's Deep, and the whole castle kind of shakes, and they're getting ready to do their one last ride out. That's amazing too. And then I would say my favorite scene, probably my favorite scene of all of them, is when Sam fights Shelob. It's a great scene for Sam. It's a great, friendship, and he totally overcomes his fears and is absolutely determined to win. And it's a great scene cinematically as well.
Yeah, I can do my top three. I guess from the first one, I would have to say, when spoiler alert, when Gandalf falls down the big hole, and just seeing like like Frodo's face and like him suffering that true loss, and like basically like, I mean, at that point, like everyone thought, well, Gandalf's gone. Like, there's no way we're going to be able to do this, because Gandalf was kind of the glue that kept us together, and he's kind of like their get out of jail free card. Things get too hairy, Gandalf can do a little magic, and some things can happen. He's got some plot armor for sure. But just seeing Frodo's face, and like that's just a beautiful scene. I want to say from Two Towers, it's definitely when the Ents destroy Isengard, and just that whole like the Ent meeting, and they're like, "We've just said hello." Like it takes some, like, is talking to a tree, as you can imagine, could take forever, and it's just funny to see like how like they're really not in a hurry for anything, but then they decided to go in all on Isengard and keep Saruman locked up. And then from the third one, I would have to say, at the very end, at Aragorn's coronation, when when the hobbits start to bow, and Aragorn's like, "You, my friends, bow for no one." Like, I mean, and like everyone's bowing to these little hobbits, and I mean I just get emotional just talking about it.
I know.
It's such a beautiful scene.
Those are great picks. What about you, Andrew? What are your thoughts?
Ooh, I've got really. I'm going to do two.
Okay.
One is the scene in the movies where Gandalf has his staff and he sticks it down and says, "You shall not pass," which is a great scene.
Amazing.
The second one is kind of silly. Anytime Allie is making potatoes, I say potatoes.
Oh yeah.
So that's another when Sam's talking to Gollum about how to make potatoes.
Yeah, excellent.
I love that scene just because I annoy Allie with quoting that.
It's great. They're just great all around. I mean, I could probably tell you every scene is my favorite.
Yeah. You could definitely talk yourself into making everything your favorite.
Yeah, no, it's very easy.
Yeah, and I mean, this, like y'all have said kind of throughout this podcast, this story is so expansive. There's so much to it, and we didn't even scrape the surface on this story. But the way I want to end is kind of how the story ends. So if you guys will indulge me for a minute. The story ends with Sam and Frodo destroying the ring in the fires of Mordor, and Frodo ends up traveling back to the Undying Lands with Bilbo and Gandalf. And in their goodbyes, Frodo says this: "Sam, I must go. I was a ring bearer. You will never truly know what it did for me." Then Frodo handed Sam his book. "The last pages are for you, Sam, for your adventure." Sam is already in tears. Frodo hugs him and tries to comfort him, though he knows that Sam would never truly be comforted. Frodo walks onto the boat and looks one last time at his good friends, and then with a small nod, he turns away. And so with that, I want to say my goodbyes to y'all. Thank y'all so much for joining me on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
This has been great. Thanks for having us on here.
Oh, yeah, it's been awesome, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Y'all have a great day.
You. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Methodical Methodist Podcast. If you have enjoyed this show, I hope you might consider heading on over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review of the show. It is very much appreciated. And until next time, stay methodical.